All right, you're welcome back. It is time for us to go on to our top story this afternoon on Hello Nigeria. As introduced earlier, we have an environmental expert and campaigner, also the founder of Lufasi Park. Desmond Majekodunmi is our guest this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Really.
A while ago, after the famous Lagos floods, we had you via Skype, and we had to bring you back because of the urgency of what is happening. A lot of us are panicking. We've seen floods in Sierra Leone, devastating floods, Benue, Houston. And why this frequency? What is really happening?
Yeah, it's not just Benue and Houston. And by the way, the Houston one was totally unprecedented. They never had that volume of rain, millions of liters of rain falling. And it's happening in Australia. In May, it happened in Australia. In India, Bangladesh, it's happening right now as we're talking. And right here in Nigeria, it is happening. It happened in Lagos just a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, didn't it? Yeah.
Twice in Lagos. Yeah. One first on the island and then next on the mainland.
Yes, yeah, well, as you know, the mainland one, because the mainland people were, teasing the islanders.
Yes. It was karma.
Yeah. So, why is it happening? It's inevitable. It's inevitable. The whole climatic system is an incredible system. We just take it for granted because, rain always falls and you have rainy season, you have dry season, but there is a wonderful system behind that whole process of having the water evaporate from a large water body, usually the sea, sometimes an inland lake, and then have that evaporated water suspended in the sky, because water is such a very peculiar element that it becomes very light when it evaporates and is suspended in the sky. And then the process of the wind that will blow that suspended water, which is in the form of clouds that you see. That wind is another incredible process. It's only quite recently, over the last 100 years or so, that science has actually been able to understand what drives winds, and then for that water vapor to evaporate and fall. It's a combination of incredible processes of nature. And unfortunately, we, in our ignorance, our belligerence, our greed, and our determination that we are the dominating species, we can do whatever we want to do, take dominion, and just march on nature. We've been prodding nature a little bit too hard for too long. We've been upsetting certain specific balances of nature that make her operable, that make her our life support system. And in that process, we're now getting reactions. And in this case, we're talking specifically of too much poison, too much carbon pollution in the atmosphere, which is now creating global warming, and global warming is now creating these kind
weather systems,
aberrations.
All right. Now, I was going to ask you the question before you talked about us, throwing poisons into the air. Now, what are some of our habits and some of the things that we currently do to upset the natural climatic factors and to give us things like floods that we see today?
Yeah, that's a very
on an individual basis, and then corporations too.
Yeah, well, it actually starts in our heads, like everything does. Everything starts in the mind as a thought process. And what has been going on in our heads for far too long is this sort of concept that we, mankind, are apart from nature. Whereas the reality is that we are a part of nature. We're not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. And because we're supposedly the most intelligent species, supposedly, yeah, although some of the things we do, defines the imagination, our constituted role, and this is actually scripturally injuncted. Every single scripture, every major religion injuncts it very, very clearly, from Christianity to Islam to Buddhism to Hinduism to Zoroaster, you name it. They all say very clearly that man is actually a steward of creation. Man is actually the one who's supposed to
Custodian.
be nurturing, custodian. Yes. The one I'm familiar with is the Bible, Genesis 2:15. He put the man in the garden to care for and to keep it. But unfortunately, we've distanced ourselves in our minds from this reality. And this has now manifested itself in this terrible, terrible abuse. Because we don't understand it, we don't care, and we're being driven by profit motivations. And one of the major things we've been doing is this massive poisoning of the atmosphere. You know, the reality is that when you burn fossil fuel, when you burn petrol or diesel or even gas, the fumes that are emitted from that burning are poisonous. I've said it before. I think even on this program, you can't sit in this room here with a big generator pouring the fumes. It'll kill you.
Yes.
Simple as that.
We've seen incidents
I mean,
of
we
that
have
happening.
seen,
Time and time again.
from the cars as well, fumes from cars.
Yes.
We have seen people who have died.
Absolutely. It is toxic. It's poisonous. There's carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, you name it. All sorts of poisons are coming out of burning. And what's happening in the world and what has happened over the last 150 years or so, ever since the Industrial Revolution took off with the use of burning coal to create energy, which is very efficient, and coal was in abundance. In those days, there was a lot of ignorance, but even then, after a short while, they realized that it's poisonous. So they put big smokestacks on their factories, and then the smoke came into the cities, and then the cities got polluted. And eventually, you know, they became more and more refined, used the spirit of witty invention to have fantastic inventions to actually, you know, eliminate what looked poisonous, but it still is poisonous. And we've been pumping this into the atmosphere. So it's not just poisonous to us, it's poisonous to the atmosphere. And hey, guess what? The atmosphere is now reacting by having too many carbon gases, too much global warming, and it's creating a lot of problems.
Now let's look at the story of mankind. We were made to, they call it survival of the fittest. So we've had different leaps, the Industrial Revolution, the technological age and all of that. But on paper and as a matter of fact, the majority of those responsible, of the countries responsible for polluting the earth are the developed countries today. They used it to get to where they are today, power their economy and all of that. And Africa seems to be behind. Do we have to take the same steps, or can we bypass that through a leap in technology and catch up with the rest of the developed world as we are today?
Can I have a high five for that question? Whoa, man, spot on. Absolutely, and this is the advantage that we have, especially here in Nigeria. We can leapfrog all those nonsensical technologies and get away from that mindset. In days gone by, they pleaded ignorance, we didn't know. After a while, they knew, as we said, and they still continued because greed motivation was moving on the fast lane. Industrialists, they were playing a very dangerous game with our health, our lives, and the health of our planet. And we now know that it is a dangerous, dangerous game, because these call it floods. These are one of the typical reactions. They are horrendous. And guess what? Even the massive one in Houston, Texas, it was just the tip of the iceberg. If we continue pushing it this way, it's going to get a lot worse. The kind of thing that we're seeing in Benue, it happened in 2012. And it's happening again now. Right. And it's going to happen again maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. And maybe, you know, if we continue this way, it's going to be like almost, you know, a regular occurrence all over the world. Boom, boom, massive, massive, massive floods, and then desertification in one particular area. So we now know this in Nigeria, and we can leapfrog, just like we did with the landline.
Yes,
the landline and the GSM. Come on, man. Whoever, does anybody have a landline anymore?
I don't think so. Everyone's on mobile phones.
Everybody's
now.
on mobile phones.
Now, we've talked about the causes, you know, some of the causes of, you know, upsetting the climate. What can we do as individuals and as corporate organizations? I know that there's a bill currently in the Senate, in the House, you know, to be passed on the environment. What can we do to improve our situation? Again, it's a good question, but again, it starts in our minds, in our heads. We have to get that fundamental reality into our minds, that the environment, which is what we call it generally, I don't call it that.
I call it our life support system. Everything from the oxygen without which you cannot survive for 5 minutes, the water, the food, it all comes from the environment. And then, and this should hammer it home into any sane, responsible individual, that it's not just our life support system, but it's our children's life support system. And we're keeping it in trust for them, and we must hand it over to them, whether we like it or not. Some of us a little bit sooner than others, but all of us one day will say goodbye and hand it over. So our children's life support system, hey, get that into our heads, and we need to care for it. So we need to have that fundamental attitudinal change. And then once we get that in our minds, then there's so many practical things.
But
that we can
isn't there a conflict of interest in the sense that for most businesses, profit trumps environmental reasons, which shouldn't be so? In Indonesia, in Papua New Guinea, we've seen entire rainforests go in the Amazon just for profit. We have the president of the most powerful country in the world who refused to sign the Paris Agreement. So I want to know if it's reversible, the signs of the depletion of the ozone layer. If we start building buffers and planting trees, can we heal the planet?
Whoa, that's very deep, and it's a deep philosophical area that you're going into. You know, because the profit motivation, it's important. Capitalism has suddenly driven a lot of the wonderful developments.
A lot of environmentalists like you will do environmental impact assessment, and then they still go on to build this multi-million-dollar buildings just because.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's unconscionable. And I think what has now happened is that this mindset has penetrated deep into the heart and soul of some very, very influential people like Al Gore, who's been screaming about this for years and years and years. People like Ban Ki-moon, even people like Bill Gates are now telling us. And what are they telling us? They're saying that Obama said it, this is the first generation that has felt the effects of climate change, but is the last generation that can do what? Prevent it from becoming unstoppable and catastrophic. Whoa. So it's really, really in our hands. It's up to us to get the reality that we cannot destroy. So no matter what the motivation is, you know, I mean, come on. How much money do you want to make? And you're destroying your children's life support system. And don't just say, okay, well, we'll hand it over, you know, technology will take care of it. Look, our technology is wonderful. But when it's compared to nature, they saw, okay, in Houston. They saw it coming. They saw the hurricane coming. They said this is a Category 4 hurricane. It's going to hit coast. It's going to cause floods and so on. They saw it coming. And, you know, the great technological giant of the world who put the first man on the moon and so on, were they able to slow down that hurricane for half a second?
No, they weren't.
Oh, with all the technology. So we shouldn't rely on that.
It should be a wake-up call.
Yeah,
I mean, we have seen again and again that technology can and will fail in situations like this because nature is nature. It's natural. And, you know, there's nothing that we can do with regards to science or artificial means to stop it.
Nature's far too powerful. You can't overpower nature.
All right. Thank you so very much, Desmond, for coming. We have so many things to talk about. We haven't at all scratched the surface because when we bring you again, we'd like to talk about ways that people who are watching can start to actively take part in doing what you've said, the last generation, to prevent it from being irreversible.
And I want to say Kenya has set a trend by banning
plastic. Yeah. And you guys are doing wonderful here. You know why I say that? Because when I come in, I see all sorts of plants and all sorts of trees and so on. And that is what is needed. That's part of nature's system. Plant trees. Everybody must have some green plant in their house, and everybody should be responsible for at least 100 trees in their lifetime.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Again, we've been speaking to Desmond Majekodunmi, environmental activist, and of course, the founder of Lufasi Park. You need to go to Lufasi Park. Talking about ways to help our environment, it is certainly contributing to that. All right, we'll go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking sports with Namdi. Now, on Friday, we made a bet as to which team would win. Let's see who'll be laughing after this break.
To enjoy more of these our Ogbonge videos when you just watch, press this button to subscribe on top of our YouTube page. You go love her.